Brunner's constructivist theory. Before I start to tackle my lesson, let me first give some information about Jerome Brunner. Jerome Brunner was an American psychologist who made significant contributions to human cognitive psychology and cognitive learning theory in educational psychology. Brunner was one of the first proponents of constructivism. The second one, let us define constructivism. What is constructivism? Constructivism is based on the idea that people actively construct or make their own knowledge. Basically, learners use their previous experiences as a foundation and build on it with new things that they learn. Brunner's theory on constructivism encompasses the idea of learning as an active process wherein those learning are able to form new ideas on what their current knowledge is as well as their past knowledge. According to Hayne 1991, the main theme inherent in constructivism is that people learn by constructing new ideas and concepts by interpreting them through comparison with previous knowledge. People attribute meaning to new ideas and this process represents learning. This implies that learning is not only about simply being exposed to new information, but is an active process whereby learners examine, decode, and interpret new concepts and ideas. Learners select and transform information, construct hypotheses, and rely on cognitive structures to build and refine their schemas. It is according to Kever and Moss 2003. Broken down, Brunner emphasizes that people interpret their world through the similarities and differences between objects and events. Learners thus compare new ideas to ones they already have and learn through the similarities and differences they find. A person's socio-cultural background and situation play a highly important role in dictating what sorts of information that person will learn, as well as forming the cognitive process that person uses to build and use schemas. It is also according to Kever 2003. These principles are central to the discussion of education. These principles are central to the discussion of education design improvement later in this paper, and they owe much to ideas proposed by Jean Piaget. While working with children to improve standardized intelligence testing, he modified the standard methods by going further than simply recording a child's answer. Piaget encouraged children to reason about the problem he posed to them. Through this, he discovered that younger children were no dumber than older ones, were they be, nor were they behind in any way. Younger children simply thought about things in a completely different way than did the older ones because they have a conception of the world that is distinct from that of older children. It is according to Gardner 1972. Jerome Brunner has three modes of representation. The first is an active representation. An active representation is the representation of objects and events through action and movement, which is characteristic of infants and small children. That is, the child understands things in terms of how they can be manipulated, used, or acted upon. It is action-based. The second one is the iconic representation. The iconic representation is a visual summarization of images, or it is an image-based. The third one, or the last mode of representation, is symbolic representation. Symbolic representation is the use of words and other symbols to describe experiences, or we should say that symbolic representation is a language-based. Brunner's work established the importance of understanding the structure of a subject being studied, the need for active learning as the basis for true understanding, and the value of reasoning in learning. Thank you.
Brunner's constructivist theory. So, this is all about the idea of learning. as an active process wherein those learning are able to form new ideas on what the current knowledge is as well as the past knowledge. So, in these are the four major of aspect in Brunner's theory. Brunner's 1996 state that a theory of constructivism should address from a four major aspect. So this is the four major aspect includes 1. Predisposition towards learning. 2. The ways in which a body of knowledge can be structured so that it can be most readily grasped by the learner. And 3. The most effective sequences in which to present materials. And lastly, 4. The nature. Is Brunner a social constructivism? So, Brunner's theory of scaffolding emerged around 1976 as a part of constructivism theory and was particularly influenced by the work of Freudian psychologist Lev Vygotsky. Brunner's believed that when children have learned new concepts, they need to help from teachers and other adults in the form of active support. So that's all my report. Thank you.
Organizing knowledge. Brunner 1961 proposes that learners construct their own knowledge and do this by organizing and categorizing information using a coding system. Brunner believed that the most effective way to develop a coding system is to discover it rather than being told by the teacher. The concept of discovery learning implies that students construct their own knowledge for themselves, also known as a constructivist approach. The role of the teacher should not to be teach information by rote learning, but instead to facilitate the learning process. This means that a good teacher will design lessons that help students discover the relationship between bits of information. To do this, a teacher must give students the information they need, but without organizing for them. The use of spiral curriculum can aid the process of discovery learning. Each area of knowledge in our personal knowledge system has a general structure. That structure is also reflected in the natural learning process. Our brains use the natural learning process to organize knowledge in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Making concept learning effective. Provide clear definitions of the concept. Make the defining features very concrete and prominent. Give a variety of positive instances. Cite a best example or prototype. Provide opportunity for learners to identify positive and negative instances. Ask learners to think of their own example of the concept. Point out how concepts can be related to each other. These ways will help students like us in knowing the right information and utilizing the knowledge learned so we can construct better understanding and ideas. The three examples of concepts are: concrete concepts have aspects or dimensions that are easily seen, heard, or touched. Fruit would be an example of the concrete concept due to its tangible characteristics of being seed associated, fleshy, and plant-derived. Second, semi-concrete concepts have some combination of concrete and non-concepts have some combination of concrete and non-concrete characteristics of a politician could be concrete, such as holder or candidate for an elected office. However, other characteristics may not be as concrete, such as one who serves the public. Next, abstract concepts do not have many absolute characteristics that are easy to comprehend with the senses. Unlike concrete and semi-concrete abstract concepts are not explained by a list of well-defined rules or characteristics. One example is love, as the characteristics of love might differ from one person to the next. Thank you.
Brunner's constructivist theory. Principles of Brunner's theory. First, Instructions must be concerned with the experiences and context that make the student willing and able to learn. Number 2, instructions must be constructed so that it can be easily grasped by the students or the spiral organization. Third, is instruction should be designed to facilitate extrapolation with and fill in the gaps, going beyond the information given. Positive contributions of Brunner's constructivism to educational design. The Brunner's constructivist theory's major theme is that learning is an active process whereby students learn best by constructing new ideas and building new schemas based upon current and past knowledges. Educational models that utilizes constructivist theory consider these influences and attempt to match education system and curricula to each socio-culturally distinct group of students. To support this statement, this report will first delve into Brunner's constructivist theory. This report will contrast real-life examples of constructivist educational models and discuss ways to improve curricula by using constructivist model.
Concept learning, also known as category learning, concept attainment, and concept formation, is defined by Goodnow that can be used to distinguish the exemplar from non-exemplar of various categories. More simply, concept are the mental categories that help us classify objects, events, or ideas, building on the understanding that each object, event, or idea has a set of common relevant features. Thus, concept learning is strategy which require a learner to compare and contrast group of categories that do not contain concept-relevant features. In a concept learning, thus a human or machine learner is trained to classify object by being shown a set of example object by being with their class labels. The learner simplifies what has been observed by condensing it in the form of an example. The simplified version of what has been learned is then applied to future examples. Concept learning takes place over many areas. When a concept is difficult, it is less likely that the learner will be able to simplify and therefore will be less likely to learn colloquially. The task is known as learning from example. More theories of concept learning are based on storage of exemplar, avoid summarization, or overt abstraction of any kind. Concept learning inferring a Boolean valued function from training example of its input and output. A concept is an idea of something formed by combining all its features or attributes which construct the given concept. Every concept has two components. Attributes, features that one must look for to decide whether a data instant is a positive one of the concept. A rule denotes what conjunction of constraint on the attributes will qualify as a positive instance of the concept.
The four major principles of Brunner's theory on constructivism encompass: first, a predilection toward learning; the second, how a grouping of knowledge is able to be conducted to best be understood by the learner; the third is effective manners for the teacher to present said materials to the learner, with the fourth and final aspect being the progression of rewards as well as punishments. Brunner is Brunner is poignant about language and how this affects within this theory of learning development. It is pertinent to any success of a child to identify the differences between adult language and language used by children. With the child being younger, they need time to advance not only the conceptual learning but their language as well. When evaluating study skills of the child, Brunner's theory suggests that the teachers be explicit regarding organization, help the learner to focus on the larger task at hand as well as the goals, instead of getting caught on minor details or frustrations. Social as well as cultural contingencies of learning were adapted into Brun's later work theorizing how this affected learning.
Brunner was an American psychologist who made a significant contribution to human cognitive psychology and cognitive learning, the theory in education and psychology. A major theme in the theoretical framework of the Brunner is that the learning is an active process in which learners pass knowledge. The learning selects and transforms information, construct a hypothesis and makes decisions relying on a cognitive structure to do so. Cognitive structure provide meaning and organization to express and allow the individual to go behind the information given.
Ikat mo lang.
As far as instruction is concerned, the instructor should be try and encourage the students to discover the principle by themselves. The task of the instructor is translate information to be learned into format appropriate to learning states. Understanding curriculum should be organized in a principled manner so that students continually builds upon what they have already learned.
Discovery learning is a technique of inquiry-based learning and considered a constructivist-based approach to education. Discovery learning can occur whenever the student is not provided with an exact answer, but rather the materials in order to find the answer themselves. Discovery learning may encourage students to take ownership of their own educational process. Example of discovery learning: having students create simulations of things. Discovery learnings, which is students must be able to have a technique and able to expand their meanings to find the answers by themselves.
I am here to discuss to you the application of Bronner's constructivist theory. The Bronner's constructivist theory is a general framework for instruction based upon the study of. Bronner illustrated his theory in the context of mathematics and social science program for young children in 1973. The original development of the framework for reasoning process is described in Bronner, Goodnow, and Austin 1951. And in Bronner 1983 focuses on language learning in young children. So constructivism is a very broad conceptual framework in philosophy and science, and Bronner theory represent one particular perspective. So now, let's proceed in the example taken from Bronner's 1973. Let's continue to the example taken from Bronner's in 1973. In this example, the concept of prime numbers appears to be more readily grasped when the child, through construction, discovers that certain handful of beans cannot be laid out in completed rows and columns. So these patterns the child learns happen to be called prime. It is easy for the child to go from this step to the recognition that a multiple table, so-called, is a record sheet of quantities in completed multiple rows and columns. Oh my God! And last is the principle of Bronner's constructivist theory. So the number one principle is instruction must be concerned with the experience and context that make the student willing and able to learn. So this is number one, is what we call the readiness.
Number 2 principle is instruction must be structured so that it can be easily grasped by the student. So it is called the spiral organization or the number 2 principle. And last, the number 3 principle is instruction should be designed to facilitate extrapolarization and or fill in the gaps going beyond the information given. So that is the 3 principle example of Bronner's constructivist theory. God bless, that's all.
Brunner's constructivist theory. The main theme inherent in constructivism is that people learn by constructing new ideas and concepts by interpreting them through comparison with previous knowledge. People attribute meaning to new ideas in this process represent learning, he in 1991. This implies that learning is about simply being exposed to new information, but is an active process whereby learners examine, code, decode, and interpret new concepts and ideas. Learners select and transform information, construct hypotheses, and rely on cognitive structures to build and refine their schemas. Kiver, 2003. Broken down, Brunner emphasized that people interpret their world through the similarities and differences between object and events. Learners thus compare new ideas to the ones they already have and learn through the similarities they find. A person's sociocultural background and situation play a highly important role in detecting the sorts of information that person will learn, as well as forming the cognitive process that person will use to build the use schemas, Kiver 2003. These principles are central to the discussion of education, design improvement later in this paper, and they owe much to ideas proposed by Jean Piaget while working with children to improve standardized intelligence testing. He modified the standard methods by going further than simply recording a child's answer. Piaget encouraged children to reason about the problem he posed to them. Through this, he discovered that younger children were dumber and older ones nor were they behind anyway. Younger children seemed to about this in a completely different way than did the older ones, because they have a conception of word that is distinct from that or older children, Gardner, 1972.